What's the difference between a house of prayer and a church? That's a question, and it's kind of a question or a misperception we get at Awakening House of Prayer because we're a church, but we're a house of prayer, but we're a church, but we're a house of prayer. Here's the thing, we were a house of prayer before we were a church. And so we couldn't shake the name. We couldn't change the name. We even tried to go with Awakening Church for a time being. And some people do call the church services Awakening Church. But the reality is that there is a difference. There is a distinction between house of prayer and church, even if the house of prayer, like ours did, birthed a church. We have houses of prayer in different nations of the world. Most of them are just houses of prayer. Another one or two are actually full blown churches. Two of them actually are full blown churches with a house of prayer component, but they were always houses of prayer first. And so there are similarities and differences between a house of prayer and a church. And it's important to understand those if you are venturing into the prayer movement and you want to engage at a high level or really any level. You need to get these few things sort of down pat. So one, number one, at some level, all churches should be a house of prayer, right? I mean, in Matthew 21:13, Jesus said, "It is written," quoting again from Isaiah, "It is written, shall my house be called my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Other gospels say, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." So at some level, churches should be a house of prayer, but we know that that's not always the case. So there's the distinction there. Houses of prayer can birth churches. Churches can have praying components, but they're two separate things at the end of the day. The second point that I want to make is that a praying church is not a house of prayer. Okay. Technically, in biblical terms, my house shall be called a house of prayer. Many things were going on in the temple, sacrifices, prayer, these sorts of things. But a praying church is not the same as a house of prayer by our modern definition. There's a difference. There's a difference also between a praying church and a house of prayer. So a church may have a lot of prayer meetings, and I hope they do. I know some churches that are strong praying churches. Still not the same as a house of prayer. Still not the same as a house of prayer. The difference is a house of prayer is dedicated to prayer, or at least that is the primary thrust. So at Awakening House of Prayer, we have more prayer meetings than we have church services. And our prayer room is open a lot. It doesn't mean there's always people in the prayer room, but our prayer room is open. Our prayer room has historically been open 5 days a week. And Friday nights, we're open Monday nights, we're open Sunday mornings before church service. And so our primary thrust is not church. At Awakening House of Prayer, our primary thrust is house of prayer. Okay. And so a church can have a lot of prayer meetings going on and still not be a house of prayer. The difference is the primary thrust of a church is not prayer. The primary thrust of a church is the fellowship, the Sunday message. That's the main event. Okay. You got it. Number three, a church can birth a house of prayer. A house of prayer can birth a church. And so sometimes you'll have a church leader who's on fire for prayer, and they may say, I really want to birth a house of prayer within my church. We've seen that a lot, actually. We have one of our houses of prayer, one of our AHOPs, it's inside of a church. And so they birth that AHOP inside their church. And so that does happen. We see, let's see, at least two of them. They were birthed inside churches. Whereas you also see, though, that a house of prayer can birth a church. Again, that's what we did over time. Awakening House of Prayer here in headquarters in South Florida, we evolved into a full blown church, and then later an apostolic center. So now, so we started off with the house of prayer, then we birthed a church, and then we birthed healing rooms. Then we birthed prophecy rooms. We always had training, nights of worship, all of these things. That's a mature model. Houses of prayer don't start off with all of these things. There's no way you could man it. There's no way you could train people that fast. I mean, I suppose there is a way if God wanted you to do it, but typically the house of prayer is the heartbeat. It's the genesis. It's the center of everything. Number four. You getting this? Number four. A church is more than a house of prayer, and a house of prayer is more than a church. A church is more than a house of prayer. It does more. And a house of prayer is more than a church. And the key difference is there are key differences in structure and the mentality of churches and houses of prayer. For example, the house of prayer is more focused on worship and prayer. A church is more focused on preaching and teaching. I sort of alluded to that in different language earlier. A house of prayer more focused on worship and prayer. A church is more focused on preaching and teaching. Okay. And so we do preaching and teaching, but our focus is on worship and prayer. Even in our preaching and teaching services, we have a lot of worship and prayer. So we may pray, 30 minutes before the service starts just because we like to pray. And so a traditional a traditional church more focused on preaching, teaching, house of prayer more focused on worship and prayer. Letter B, traditional churches are centered around the Sunday meeting. Like I said, that is the main event. Everything revolves around the Sunday. And maybe if there's a midweek, that's a big focus too. But everything revolves around the gathering of the saints to worship and hear the word. And although there may be a corporate prayer meeting in a church, I hope there is. A lot of churches do, thank God, have corporate prayer meetings. Some don't. But although there may be a corporate prayer meeting, the thrust of the ministry is the main event. Again, everything is geared toward that. That's why they have paid staff. That's the sanctuary is decorated as of a prayer, like church. Everything is centered on the main event. Everything is centered on that. Whereas House of Prayer, everything's centered on prayer. That's the main event. Prayer is the main thing. So at Awakening House of Prayer, prayer is the main thing. And that's why I believe we're seeing so many churches call us wanting to put the House of Prayer in the church because they don't have the mechanism or the background or the wherewithal to sort of launch a House of Prayer. They would know the first thing about it. And so that's why we're helping churches to do that, to put the AHOPs in their certain, because so many more churches now are really wanting that prayer expression, but they don't know where to start. It's one thing to have a corporate prayer meeting. It's another thing to have a house of prayer. It's just a whole different mentality. Okay. Letter C. The house of prayer may have equipping opportunities. So it's not to say that there's not teaching in the house of prayer. When we first started Awakening House of Prayer, when we first started, we had prayer 4 days a week. And within a couple of months, my tremendous leadership skills all those years ago grew it down to once a week. And it was just me. We had a lot of people to start, but see, people burn out quickly sometimes. And so if they're not in it for the right reasons, they won't stay. But when we got going with the House of Prayer, I started doing a Sunday afternoon equipping. Why? Because I thought and I felt, well, first of all, I didn't want to do it on a Sunday morning because I didn't want to look like church because we weren't a church. We weren't a church. I didn't want to look like church. Second of all, I figured if I do it on Sunday afternoon, about 1:30, those people who are just coming out of church, they have time to get lunch. They can come over here, the really hungry ones, to get equipped because it's not a preaching. It was a teaching. It was an equipping, a lot of times on prayer and the prophetic. And so the House of Prayer may have equipping opportunities, but the main focus is on doing the praying rather than just learning about prayer. So we'll teach you about prayer, but then we're going to make you, jump in that intercessory prayer mode. Not make you, but hope that you do. Letter D, the House of Prayer puts Jesus at the center. The House of Prayer puts Jesus at the center. The goal is to minister to the Lord in worship and pray for his will. That's the goal. That's the whole goal. The primary thrust of the House of Prayer is not to equip people. It's not to gather people for fellowships and potlucks. That's all good. I'm not against that. We do that. Okay. But the goal of the House of Prayer, the heartbeat, is to minister to the Lord and pray for his will. And the church may also minister to the Lord, but the main focus is ministering to the people, which often means programs over intimacy. Does that make sense? And listen, I'm not a church, but I'm all for the church. I'm not all against, the church. I mean, Jesus loves the bride. So we are all the church. Letter E, the House of Prayer doesn't just have prayer meetings. It's a place where the community can come in and sit and pray or sit in silence in the presence of the Lord with worship music, whether it's live or whether it's live streamed. It's a place where there's this atmosphere, people can come into it. The church, by contrast, they tend to have corporate prayer meetings, but not an open prayer room. So if there's not a prayer meeting, you can't just go up to the church and sit to pray. Whereas the house of prayer, there's designated times, whether some are 24/7, whether there's day hours, night hours, but there's a place where you can come and sit and pray. Letter F. A house of prayer tends to gather intercessors and those seeking intimacy with God. The house of prayer tends to attract somebody who wants more than just a Sunday service. The house of prayer attracts those who are seeking, they're hungry for intimacy with God. They want to worship, they want to pray. It's not that they don't want to go to church. They may go to a church and then go to the house of prayer some other time. The two are not mutually exclusive. You can have both, you can do both, even in the same facility. We've proven it. We've proven the model. A church tends to attract people looking for discipleship, counseling. A church tends to attract people that want to be, fed. They're hungry for the word, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, and sometimes it's both. I mean, sometimes people want to be discipled, counseled, and seeking intimacy with God. Those two people are not mutually exclusive, but not all believers want that. Let's face it. Not everybody wants to just pray, pray, pray. Not everybody wants to just sit and soak in worship. Not everybody wants that. Some people just want to go to church on Sundays, get a message, have some fellowship, and go home. And there's nothing wrong with that. But those are the differences between a house of prayer and a church. And again, you can have both in one facility. We've proven the model. That's why we're helping so many churches, and we'd like to help more set up the Awakening House of Prayers in their church because we've got the infrastructure. We can attract the intercessors, and many churches need more intercessors than they have. And so that's the beauty of the model. We call that the hybrid model, and we developed it here first at AHOP, and we've seen it work in the nations of the earth. So, all right, God bless you. I'll see you for the next question. Hey guys, Jennifer LeClaire here. Maybe you're watching this video and you're saying, well, how can I start an Awakening House of Prayer in my city, in my church? Maybe you're a pastor and you say, I really would like to launch a prayer house, but I don't know how. We can launch one in your facility. Or maybe you're a believer and you're saying, well, I don't have the capacity right now to start a house of prayer, but I'd like to start a prayer hub. I'd like to gather the intercessors that I know with right alignment, with the infrastructure, with the promotional tools to help me create synergy with my prayer group. We have the websites, we have the technology, we have the promotional power. We've got it all to gather and mobilize intercessors in the face of the earth. All we're waiting for is you. Check it out, awakeninghouseofprayer.com. You can learn how to start a house of prayer in your city, or just go straight to awakeningprayerhubs.com if you want to start what I call a mini, MINI, house of prayer. You don't have a facility open to the public, but you want to do it in your home, you want to do it in a prison, you want to do it in a church, you want to have an e-prayer hub, a digital prayer hub. That means you're on WhatsApp, you're in a Facebook group, you're on a phone call, a Zoom call. We have created a diverse model that will serve churches, that will serve pastors, that will serve believers at whatever stage you're at. We want to see prayer propagated in the earth. Go to one of those websites, sign up, find more information. We are here for you. I love you guys. I'll see you on the other side.